Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello and welcome to the 23rd module in the series Marketing Management, a VUCA perspective. We are discussing fundamentals and I am your friend and tour guide on this lovely journey, Siddhi Prad Bhattacharya. We've discussed a lot about what VUCA trends are, how volatility, uncertainty, complexity, the core subject, and ambiguity affect all decisions when it comes to a business, and in a very, very strong way, all things that affect marketing as a thinking function within the organization. Currently, we've discussed a lot about research and how various factors from research play out in a VUCA scenario. Through certain worked examples and cases, today what we'll try and understand how the market response actually funds and favors and gives a certain direction to the way an organization must think its products and plan for whatever it brings out to actually give delight to its end customers, the biggest and strongest stakeholders in the entire scenario of whatever stands for marketing. I'm sure most of you have seen Shark Tank and are very well versed with who Mark Cuban is. And what he says is the only way to win is to create a product or service that is so good, people will tell their friends about it. This at the core is what works in marketing, as we know, word of mouth. When a real tangible consumer tells his friends and family, people they come into contact with about a particular brand, its products, its services, and why they have placed their trust, their money, their goodwill with it, and why the others should also have enough reason to do so, that is precisely where marketing succeeds the most. This is something which marketers must plan for, and being the thinking part of an organization, they must help the other parts of the entire chain in the value creation systems within an organization to come up with better products and services which meet that kind of criteria with consumers. So here we are trying to look at mapping consumer responses and identifying insights from there, and through case studies we'll try and understand how that has played out in real world scenarios. We'll also try and understand a deeper understanding of the consumer psyche with what tools we can bring into bear in that particular scenario. Consumers typically respond to market dynamics with their preferences and they showcase it through their behavioral aspects. These are things that marketers must always be patiently listening for, and once they have that particular input, they must channel it back within the corporate, within the organization systems to help bring out the resultant, which is a better product, a more thought through answer, a solution to whatever the consumer's problems are. So that is what we'll cover in today's module, measuring how well the market is responding. Let's look at Asia and its various cultures and subcultures to get a better understanding of what makes the audience, the consumer in this particular larger market tick. Because we are part of that larger microcosm of the entire world's economy. So we need to understand a variety of facets that help us understand how each of these individual economies work in their own unique fashions, and within these economies there are also other subcultures which have their own various kinds of swings. So that is something which we must first and foremost appreciate and therefore then get into the details of. In the last conversation we talked about how staying vigilant, how being always able to receive new points of feedback from whatever our market forces are. As marketers, we become more agile. We become more keenly observant of the universe of marketing and the business world around us, and how we are one step ahead of whatever changes are coming by just observing the trends that are happening around us. So, culture is a very big marker of that. Culture defined by societal values and beliefs, it shapes the individual and collective behavior of a country, of a nation, of an economy. And India and the United States have a strong belief in democracy and individual freedoms, but India as a different marketplace has faced resistance to Western cultural influences like fast food chains and global beauty pageants. These are things which we have grudgingly taken on board also, but at comparison with other economies in the Asian region, we have been also the forerunners of these. We have absorbed them better than most. In a very different microcosm, Singapore, it values meritocracy and a work ethic, which is something which dominates the entire culture of Singapore. In Hong Kong, you will observe that whatever money can buy, whatever things that you display around yourself, the materialism that walks with you as an individual is what prevails as your culture. Subcultures are many in Asia and they vary. They often are shaped by race, religion, and are very, very significant factors that influence the consumer preferences. In China, for example, there are superstitions. For instance, they seem to think that red is a lucky color, whereas black is an unlucky one. So, packaging, design, a lot of other factors have to follow that particular cultural subterfuge. So, they have to walk over those particular trenches and come out victorious by looking at cultural nuances. And when you look at individual cultures, you have to plan your entire marketing foray in a certain way. There are lots of missteps which happen in marketing, and this gives us room for thinking about those missteps so that we don't make them in our careers and in our professional life. Missteps like United Airlines used white carnations in Hong Kong, and that underlined the importance of cultural sensitivity, because white was seen as something which was connotation of death, and that typically wouldn't work for an airline very well. There are certain models like Hofstede's dimensions of culture, which further reveal how Asia's high power distance and respect for hierarchy, because we've been a culture throughout, whichever subculture, whether it be Japanese, whether it be Chinese, Indian, and various other Southeast Asian cultures, even the Middle Eastern for that matter, we emphasize the value of respected endorsements in marketing strategies, and that is typically the space from which we must start and explore these particular understandings. So, let us get into understanding cultural nuances and use established tools to understand how cultural tropes are deeply embedded within our entire psyche. So, we will start with Hofstede's cultural dimension. This is a very, very worldly utilized tool. It also helps plan strategically. Businesses can use this to understand cultural differences between various countries, and they can think of ways to implement this in a very, very proper way. So, there are various sub nuances within the larger context. For example, there is a power distance index which showcases how an organizational culture from a particular economy, from a particular nation operates. Where you have low power distance index, people are more keen to share their power. Whereas, if you've got higher power distance index, typically the systems you will find there are veering towards an authoritarian kind of corporate governance. Then, how individualism versus collectivism is celebrated or not within the organization. If there is low individualism, then organizations will follow the route of collective interest, whereas if it is more individualistic, then obviously it is the individual's interests which are held in higher regard. The lack or the proclivity towards masculinity is another factor, where if you've got less of it, you will see more gender equality being the norm, and if there is more masculinity, then you will have systems which promote patriarchy. Then, if there is more uncertainty in a particular system, you will try and certainly want to avoid it. When you try to do so, you will see greater innovation because you are ready to innovate in order to avoid any amount of uncertainty. But if you do not want to avoid uncertainty, you have lesser innovation and you tend to stick to the rules that are already established. In terms of the outlook for business, if you've got a long term versus short term conundrum, then if you're looking at very short term orientations, you will have universal guidelines, you just follow them and keep going the route. Whereas if you've got long term perspectives, then you increase your flexibility because you know that you have to course correct in the entire journey. And how much indulgence is actually looked well upon or looked down upon. So, if you have got less indulgence, then you have a more pessimistic approach towards the entire business scenario. Whereas, if you have got higher indulgence, so then the entire system is buzzing with optimism. So, these are ways to understand how typically each nation has its own cultural character, and therefore, it also seeps into the kind of businesses that operate with the main soul of business coming from that particular cultural ethnicity. So, within these cultural nuances, we can actually look at changing cultural tropes within Asia. Now, you can see a variety of markers on which you will actually be able to visualize where the cultural tropes are changing, and Asia being mostly developing nations thrown together into one continent, you will see that a lot of it is in markers like evolving gender roles. Asia typically tended to have more evolved gender roles for women and was inclusive, but then with Western influence it kept swaying back and forth. Today we see shifting attitudes happening where the workforce is seeing an increase in participation from women, and including in traditionally conservative countries like Japan and South Korea, which were more patriarchy dominated, but today you see that women are generally finding a space for themselves within the larger corporate network. Here you will see the emergence of confident and assertive women. You actually see 1.1 billion Gen Y women embrace confidence and femininity and come out as their own person. So, this is a drastic shift from what we had seen say about 50 years back, and this is part of the cultural nuance which we must respect, because this automatically gives you more target audiences, your target groups increase, and so therefore, your communications and marketing activities also increase when you are targeting these particular audiences with nuances that favor their mindset, and especially if so when you have got products and services that are aimed at that kind of an audience, which automatically delves down into products for women. So, Volvo's got Your Concept Car, a campaign which was designed by women for women. So, hence you had better and higher acceptance for that kind of a scenario. In Taiwan, you had Garden Pals, where gardening tools which were tailored for use by women and for women was also something which found favor. Singapore had the United Overseas Bank campaign, where credit cards were brought out which were exclusively for women. De Beers flipped the entire propositioning for marriage angle in such a way that now you had men's diamond rings, and these were marketed to women's buyers. Traditionally, it was always the man gifting the woman something as a token of their betrothal, and which was favored by De Beers to be a diamond ring. That campaign was flipped on its head here, and with the more empowered woman coming on the scene, now it was also legit for the woman to find her mate and propose in turn. So, this is something which has actually underscored the evolving gender roles which we have been seeing in Asia, and this is a trend which marketers have to keep their eyes and other senses on. Once you are able to tap into all these changes, you have to do a certain amount of what in marketing and branding we call trend spotting. So, we keep our eyes and sensorials open for trends which are shifting the culture, the habits, the belief systems of people, and so therefore, if you are able to ride these trends, the chances that you will resonate with your target audiences automatically increases manifold. Now, if you've seen the changing consumer focus areas in Asia, you will have seen that there is a shift from your traditional joint family format to newer urban, residential and very nuclear formats which have come in, and even to the extent that you've got single parent families coming up in a major way in cities, and you've got fairly liberal lifestyles where people can choose their lifestyle, can choose the way they live, can choose what economic conditions they'll be in, despite the fact that they may be friends who have better or lower lifestyles compared to those, but it's more an interpersonal interaction between the people rather than what particular lifestyle you're hailing from. Then, in terms of other emerging dynamics, you've seen live-in partnerships come up with children. This is pre-marriage partnerships which have come up, and it has slowly become more acceptable, especially in urban metropolitan areas, to be in live-in relationships, not be married and yet have children from that particular kind of union. And again, a growing acceptance of same-sex couples as well. So, this is part of the set of trends that we see increase, and obviously the forerunners in this case will be urban areas where exposure is higher and you get to meet more such people in closely packed groups. Again, you've got specialized establishment for non-traditional family groups, for example, clubs, spas where people congregate. So, the lifestyle which people lead takes them in these particular scenarios, gets them to be a party of that particular establishment and benefit from whatever is on offer there, including the networking, including the fraternal bonds that are created there, and also the experiences of the services which are offered by these establishments. Especially with the rise of the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen health and fitness trends, especially in urban areas, come about in a big way, even more so because people have now got a very hectic lifestyle. So, in order to be able to manage that lifestyle better, health and fitness has become extremely important and a big marker for success in people's lives. So, there is a focus on general well-being where they are increasing interest in their weight control and fitness overall. They are always on the lookout for healthier products. So, they are looking for low calorie, low fat foods so that their calorie intake is managed and they are able to maintain their overall physique and their fitness levels. Now, there is an example which is Tasty Thai, which is a healthy fast food concept in Thailand, which gives you traditional food, but in a very healthy lensing. So, that particular food is something which gives you the necessary taste and sense of belonging to that particular culture, while also ensuring that all these other factors like being low calorie, low fat, etc., is taken into consideration as well. In terms of fitness facilities, there is a success of a lot of gyms like True Fitness, California Fitness across Asia. In India, you will see Gold's Gym as a standard regular feature. Nowadays, you will also see Cult Fit, which has become a big hit in metropolises, which are bucking this particular trend. Then there are time saving and convenience led features which have become par for the course as well, because there is a lot of time pressure and longer working hours exist. So, therefore, you need certain technological advancements which help you make that entire experience more bearable. There is a demand for convenience. So, food has become fast food, credit has become quick credit, and there are efficient services which are gaining traction. In India, the last mile quick delivery services that we have seen come up very recently, like Zepto, Blinkit, Swiggy, Zomato and many such others, they are becoming part of that entire conveniences factor. So, are various ride sharing examples like Uber, Ola, etc. You can also now send courier packages by Dunzo. So, a lot of these organizations are solving these last mile quick service functions because of the time pressures and the hectic lifestyles which people have, and people have started valuing the time that they can save by utilizing these services, obviously at a certain cost, but it saves them time which is more beneficial for them to use elsewhere for their own personal benefits. The automatic impact you see is on consumer behavior, because nowadays there is increasing impatience due to the tech enabled lifestyles. If you go from a more connected city to a place which has lesser connectivity, automatically the frustration levels build, and the dependence on picking up and doing chores physically is something which affects your lifestyle and adds to your stress, because you may probably be more used to a certain kind of service delivery assurances which your metropolises and highly urban areas give you, which a less urban area may not completely provide for. Also, other factors like your mobiles, internet, etc., they become major factors in your ability to stay connected and utilize services even if they are on offer. Now, other than this, in terms of awareness, a lot of things have shifted for consumers in Asia. So, you have got eco-conscious consumers who are continuously on the lookout to be on the right side of the environment that they stay in, they live in and thrive in. So, TNS Global has actually done a study on this, and people are seen to avoid very strongly non-eco-friendly products. It could be garbage bags, it could be packaging, it could be products, it could be the base input materials which go inside of products. So, the Body Shop, etc., and various other similar brands are finding favor with people. And in India, you have got a lot of natural, organic based products coming up, and a lot of brands thriving because of these expectations from the consumer side as well. Again, Grey Group Asia Pacific has made a study where people are found to be far more willing, and they are easily able to pay more for eco-friendly goods, because they feel that by investing in certain goods that are eco-friendly to begin with, they are doing their little bit to give back to the earth and the society at large. Country wise, you will see that in China 89% people refrain from unethical purchases. This is a societal trend which you can see, and in India you will see 51 strongly agree that they are all right paying more for green products, because there is certain amount of give back to society and ecology at large. In Philippines, Indonesia and Thailand, they show more eco-sensitivity growing as people become more and more aware of these issues. So, these are shifts in consumer behavior, in consumer beliefs, and this is something which brands must also take very solid cognizance of. Now, when we are looking at marketing as an overarching end point of conversation for brands with consumers, we can look at a certain case study format where we map how consumer needs can actually affect the product development aspect, and this is where market responsiveness drives what can be offered, and this is where sharp, smart marketers who are listening in on consumers' needs and are aware of what they are looking for is something they can use. So, we will look at a case of creating a product mapped to market response and demand in our forthcoming session. In this section, we first must understand how a product works in the mind of the consumer. As a concept, a product is anything a company offers to the market for a price. The American Marketers Association defines it as a bundle of attributes which may have tangible and intangible factors defining it. It could include ideas, it could be in the form of physical goods, or it could be in the time of experienced services. Now, Kotler, the famous marketing brain on this, says that anything that satisfies a want or need, including physical goods, services, places or ideas, can be turned into a product. And the core purpose of said product is to satisfy customer needs and wants. This is typically the space where we have seen insights work for understanding what the consumer needs and wants are. And there are three very clear characteristics which he defines. The first thing is, if it is a need, then it is a basic requirement which must be fulfilled, and typically the product is at almost commodity level. Then if it is a want, then it is a specific product or a service and it fulfills a certain kind of need, and if there is a demand, there is a premium added to it. So, where it's want plus ability and desire to pay. So, even if it is at a slight premium, the consumer is all right with picking that particular item up because there is desire attached to it. So, from the Indian business verse, we will take up Tata Group as an example because they are one of the most defined business houses in India, and they are a very great example to pick up and understand how this entire mechanism works out. The approach is the first most important thing. So, they are focused on fulfilling basic needs, the roti, kapda, makan kind of variety of needs. So, if that is the case, then they look at potable water, food and breweries. They have their fingers in all of these business activities. Then they have tailored offerings, which is a notch higher. Here consumers may choose specific wants. So, there could be certain types of food or beverages. The case here being Tata Sampann, where you get unpolished pulses and other staples. Now, the point here is that because it is unpolished, it provokes the thought inside the customer's mind that it is not devoid of the basic nutrients which must come as part of the product itself. The polished products may take certain amounts of extra protein or extra layers of potency out of that particular pulse bead. So, that is what this actually promises. Again, in terms of the automotive areas, the preference for a car over a two-wheeler as transportation is something which inspired one of the most iconic product developments that Tata has done. We will discuss it later. So, that is also part of what we will be covering today. So, like I said, it is inspired by the roti, kapda, makan aspect at the start part. So, the most basic of this is salt, Tata salt, very iconic. Then you have got tea, coffee, which are brewed products, yes, but here what they have done is they have taken the tea aspect of Tata tea and they have added certain amount of activism in it. So, they have added the brand aspect. You would have seen the iconic Jago Re campaign for Tata tea, and that sort of brings out that particular perspective of how a certain kind of societal understanding of the activity of sipping chai and having a freshness come to your mind, your ability to analyze and look at problems for what they are is something which is associated back with the beverage, and Tata takes up that particular mind space with consumers. Then they have consumables in the form of what their hotels offer. So, Ginger is a business stay, Taj hotels are a luxury experience. So, this kind of consumable experiences also become part of their product offering set. In terms of clothing, they have got their west side stores which offer ready to wear garments, and a whole variety of it exists. So, they have taken the competition to all the Reliances and the brands which come in from outside like the Zaras and the H&Ms of the world. Then again, the kind of shelter. So, here residential offerings are there from Tata, commercial properties also are there. This is all under the Tata Housing subset of Tata Group. So, the conglomerate operates with the basic tenets because the entire thing is driven by the understanding of how consumer mindsets and insights work, and they define the products basis what the inputs are received from the market. Now, we will look at specific examples. So, one example here is the drinking water market. Now, here the problem that they identified with people is that there was a huge problem of limited access to pure drinking water, and this was both in urban as well as rural India. So, both places were showcasing this kind of a problem, and the huge totally addressable market size was about 2.5 billion rupees worth. So, here they got into these segments where they launched premium mineral water through their Himalayan brand, which actually tapped into the higher end. So, this was India's Evian, if you will, not that costly, yes, but it was still at the higher end of the purchase matrix, and they had packaged drinking water which covered that particular aspect. And Himalayan had a very specific USP. They did not call it just normal packaged drinking water, they called it natural mineral water, which was obviously untouched by human hands, bottled at the source. So, all of these things they built in as typical claims which put it at that certain price premium. And it was also differentiated in sensorials by the natural minerals. If you've drunk Himalayan mineral water, you will find that there is a certain aftertaste which is based on the mineral quantity inside that particular water. And yes, they also did it with the packaging and the branding aspect. So, they made it stand apart very, very uniquely, and because of the uniqueness, the premium aspect was something that they drove up, and hence they could charge that particular price margin over whatever else was being offered at the water store. In the current scenario, at home you will see that non-power water filters dominate the market, and there are lots of established players like Aquaguard, Kent, which lead the segment, and you also have Unilever coming in with their own Pureit format. So, this was a plank which they also wanted to cover. Here they wanted to enter both power and non-power water purifier markets, which they did through their Tata Swachh brand. This was what they launched as a foray, and now Tata Swachh also has enough and more standing in the market. Tata specifically, with the Tata group signifying what it stands for as a larger group process, lends that credibility to the individual Swachh brand. So, there is a parent child relationship between these two brands. We will discuss these formats as we go into the branding aspects later. So, the parent child connectivity between Tata, the master group brand, and Swachh, the child or offspring brand, is what was established, giving it the certain amount of credence in the consumer's eyes. Now, Kotler defines products at 5 different levels of consumption and human thought process. There are certain parts which are called core benefits, which solve fundamental needs or wants, which then need to be satisfied with that product. There are generic products which are essential attributes for functionality. It must do what it is claiming to be doing. Water must quench thirst, that way. Then there is expected product, which has basic attributes which customers expect. So, it must be clean, it must have obviously transparency, it must not have any contaminants and such like. And then there is augmented product. In this particular case, the natural mineral water aspect of it added those particular features which helped it differentiate from whatever else was on offer, and there was a potential product. So, there are possibilities for future innovations, enhancements. So, if you have seen other brands which do similar, so you have got international brands like Perrier. Perrier has sparkling water which has a certain amount of effervescence in that particular water offering. Those innovations have the potential to be included here if the market is found to be suitable for that kind of offering. Now, there is competition in an augmented product level because you are innovating, you are adding features, etc. So, there is a Theodore Levitt insight here that competition typically lies in the kind of packaging, the kind of services you offer, what customer advice you actually put out there, the way you deliver that particular product, and obviously how you cover all of these things in your advertising and communications. In the case of Tata, augmentation adds perceived value because you are putting at a price premium, and you are differentiating the products like Himalayan water and Tata Nano. This is where the particular automobile brand they launched, which kept them apart for the base level consumer in India for cars, is where they made their big foray. Now, expanding into the understanding of the product life cycle is something we need to understand better, so that through this we inspect the phenomenon of the automotive sector in India and understand how Tata made a dent in the minds of consumers. So, when we look at the product life cycle, the first thing that we see is what is the life cycle? It is the time from when the product is launched to when it is withdrawn from the market. That entire period is called the product life cycle. There are various stages in this. There is introduction, then there is a launch phase which builds awareness about that particular offering. Then you have a growth phase where you increase in sales, you gain more trust with people, and thereby the popularity of the particular product. There is a stage where stable sales are achieved and you have a maturity of that particular product, and you typically, if you are doing well, you gain high market share, and thereafter you have a decline because some of the other disruption comes in, some other competition comes in, and the shift creates an obsolescence due to competition or innovation. So, some other player will either undercut you or some other technology will make you redundant. These are ways the product life cycle is actually viewed. So, Theodore Levitt says on the PLC, and it was first introduced in 1965, that you have to exploit the product life cycle to maximize the benefits you can gain of it. And he emphasized that you have to adapt to customer needs and what market dynamics exist. Here, if you want to continue getting growth out of a certain exercise of introducing a particular product, you require a broad business definition, and you have to constantly ensure you are meeting the consumer needs as they keep evolving. Now, when you are creating a new product, how can you ensure that the process actually feels like you are going to succeed? At the idea generation level, from customer feedback, you start creating the basic outer sketch of what product you are going to create and offer. Your employees can also provide valuable insight, and if you have got a good technical team, they can give you innovations which you can pack within that particular product at a certain price point. Obviously, you have to also test whether it will be feasible. So, whether you can create it at en masse and actually put it out there for consumers to enjoy and yet gain benefits out of it in terms of profits. So, you have to align it with your strategy and what resources you have in hand, what production capabilities you have, what distribution you enjoy, etc. You can do market research, something we have been promoting throughout our understanding, and through this you can understand consumer needs better and how your competition stacks up in that particular space. You can create a specific team which is cross-functional typically, and typically led by a product champion who makes that particular product viable and feasible. You prototype it and you test it and you address all the technical issues and refine as you go along. Finally, you launch and monitor your progress from there, from where your full scale production happens, and your post launch evaluation also is an ongoing process from there on. Now, from there, how Tata Nano came about. Now, we first need to understand what Tata understood about the core need of the consumer in this particular space. People were riding around, this was showcased in their advertising, the initial ones which came out as well, that you needed an affordable car, because people were typically moving around on two-wheelers and they were exposed to the weather and elements, and a lack of privacy which a car afforded, because you were inside an enclosed space which was yours and could not be impeded upon by others. So, you needed something which got it to you in an affordable price, and this was aimed obviously at middle class Indians who wanted to graduate from the two-wheeler experience to the four-wheeler experience. The core benefit which they promised here was, it was a solution for transporting ideally a family of 4 parents, 2 kids, and it replaced the reliance on two-wheelers, gave them that covered space which was theirs, and it also gave them a certain sense of moving upwards and higher in the societal structure. There were design challenges. They had to keep the cost under a lakh. This was the promise that was made, and you had to have compliance with a variety of things like emissions, safety and performance standards. You obviously couldn't have something that would crawl. You had to actually make it go at a certain speed, and this was obviously for city limits. So, within the city it could manage itself very well. This was the attempt. So, what was the outcome? It came out in the form of Tata's Nano, which came out to be at that point in time the world's cheapest car, launched in 2009 after 10 odd years which it took in the development phase. They took away everything that was unnecessary and finally came up with that particular launch. Yes, the price of the Nano increased thereafter, but the promise of launching the 1 lakh rupee car which was made by Ratan Tata at that point in time was something which they finally achieved. Now, when you are taking certain product mix decisions, Tata Motors had a lot of benefits coming in from various quarters. So, you had core product lines where you had commercial vehicles. So, you had your goods ready, for example, your MHCV and LCV lines, from which you had the heavy carrying vehicles, the load carrying vehicles, and you also had passenger vehicles, for example, buses. So, that gave you a lot of build up to that particular moment. People knew of the Tata brand, They knew that Tata brand was an automotive brand in itself, so that function was always aligned. The passenger vehicles which they had launched at that point in time consisted of hatchbacks, sedans, pickups, crossovers and utility vehicles. So, it was also not their first rodeo when it came to passenger vehicles. So, people when they experienced a Tata car and that too a nano, a small sized car for a family of 4, they would be alright with testing the waters with it. This was the hope and expectation. Again, in terms of defense and homeland security, they had specialized vehicles which were used by the nation's armed forces and something which was also a very well respected fact amongst the audience. So, one big factor which came to their help was they had acquired JLR, Jaguar Land Rover, which they had added to their portfolio. It gave them a lot more other in terms of capabilities. So, it gave them better design, manufacturing, material sciences, and it also gave them better engineering, especially for engines and various other components. So, these capabilities came to the aid of Tata when they were designing the Nano. You will see that over time from when in 2009 they had launched the Nano to today in 2024, when they have a slew of very excellent looking, high performing and well selling cars, they have actually become the best in the category when it comes to NCAP, the National Car Safety Authorizing Body, both internationally as well as in India. So, because of this, their rating for safety is highest in the country. They have got 5-star plus ratings in India. So, this is something which they tout as one of the big differentiating factors, which also helps them get into consideration. Yes, they are also seen as sturdy vehicles, performing vehicles and such like, and the entire design and form factor has also improved significantly from whatever they have gained from the acquisition of JLR. So, these factors have come to the aid of Tata Motors overall. Now, here the strategies for a balanced product mix really come into play. See, at the end of the day, when you are working with a variety of teams, when you have got a certain design aspect of it, when you have got engineering, when you have got a certain stability, if you want to see how stable it can be and test scenarios, then there is safety as well which you want to consider, because a car must offer all these things. Then you have got productivity or mileage, and lot many other features like comfort. So, all these factors require a variety of cross functional teams to come into play, and all these teams must work together in tandem to achieve that particular product that you have in mind. It also has to come at a certain price point. So, whilst you are doing all of these elements, you must also ensure that you do not lose sight of the price effectively, because your consumer is only willing to pay so much and not more. So, therefore, all of these factors considered, you have to look at achieving this, and therefore, that gives you a movement towards creating synergies, and you fulfill diverse customer needs, because the customer has a lot of expectations. You remember we talked about need, want, desire. In this case, if we see, the need was to move from two-wheeler to four-wheeler. Four-wheeler transition was what the need was at that point in time. What they wanted was their private space on 4 wheels, and what they desired was, with their middle class incomes, they wanted to move into the upwardly mobile car owner strata, of society. So, hence all of these things taken into consideration, you had to suffice all of this with this particular price point in mind. So, that is where the synergies were working together, and you had to have various teams fulfilling all these diverse needs, and therefore, the approach was also to create variants based on customer preferences. So, they created tiered offerings, and you had engine capabilities, etc. The basic obviously came at a lakh, but you could take one with more frills. And the third thing was colors and personalization. So, the kind of extras that you bought in with that particular car is something that defined your experience of owning a Tata Nano. And they also used the shared platforms which they had to ensure that they maintained cost efficiency. They knew of what was going inside of a car, the JLR aspect, the earlier cars they had released through Tata Motors. All of these things came to their benefit, and these shared platforms helped them derive that particular cost efficiency. Even with all the frills at the top model, they ensured that they were still one of the most price competitive and lucrative offerings for the entry level segment in automotives in India. So, therefore, as you can see, Tata Nano was actually designed for mass market affordability. It was ensured that the entry level customer would definitely be able to afford it and feel satisfied when they owned a Tata Nano, because it would be fuel efficient, it would get the job done, it gave them the necessary privacy, it had reasonable amounts of safety. Yes, it was a tiny little thing, but despite that, it also helped them move up the social structure from being people who travelled by two-wheelers to now becoming people who had a four-wheeler to their name. So, that movement also helped people gain a certain amount of social respectability in that particular domain. This is through leveraging all the expertise that they had in compact vehicle production, and they took this from whatever hatchbacks they had made in the form of the Indica and the Indigo, etc., and the other aspects which they learned from their JLR acquisition as well. So, all in all of these factors came to the benefit of Tata when they created the Nano. And also remember, it was all driven by Ratan Tata, who had the vision of 1 lakh rupee 1 lakh car, which he wanted to give to the middle class of India. This vision and promise became both a commitment and it also became a proposition for the consumer. It also became a differentiator, because with all these features at that particular price point, nobody else was offering anything similar or remotely there. All of these factors together helped keep Tata Nano as a very, very distinct offering in the entry level car segment. So, with all these factors, Tata really managed to bring out a product which stood its ground when it came to the space in automotive cars. So, these give us a lot of lessons for sustained success for any particular brand. Here, you have to ensure that consumer preferences will always be volatile. Again, we bring in the VUCA aspects here. So, if they are volatile, they can change at the drop of a hat, because consumer benefits, consumer preferences will be derived by the culture and the societal shifts that you are there. We have talked about trend spotting in the past. So, these aspects are responses from the market which marketers must listen to. Then you have got uncertainty, because today if you try to bring out a Nano, people have already moved beyond it. They have experienced better and they were at a certain price point able to manage buying a car. Today, the overall per capita income of the country has significantly grown from 2009. So, therefore, the hunger to buy a car, the kind of and the build of car that Indians are buying today is different. At that point in time, it was necessary for people to have a car. Today, if you see the trend, people go for whatever in India is called as a crossover SUV. Yes, SUVs require a certain kind of form factor and build, but in India, the larger hatchbacks pass for SUVs, and that is what people buy. So, that is one particular aspect. So, these are various complexities in the entire automotive buying sequence, and which is something a marketer must understand, because not all these things will stay the same, and so therefore, you do not know what will change in the future. That is the kind of ambiguity which is always part of market forces working in your favor or against it, depending on how you look at it, either as a threat or as an opportunity, which is where you have got friends helping you, you do your surveys, you get your research in place, you have data backing up whatever hypothesis you have thought of. With these inputs, marketing, the thinking arm of any organization, helps marshal the information to all the other assigned and aligned departments, so that you continuously innovate. You come up with answers to consumer problems, and your product is differentiated, and it also is well received. It stands its ground in front of whatever competition has to throw. You refine your product offerings as you go along. So, the Nano has been discontinued, but the way it was launched and kept up that particular vision of the chairperson of the Tata Group. So, that entire promise and the belief it built in Tata as a brand is something that came also to share the goodwill which they still own and have built upon. Therefore, also the fact that they had to actually go through a lot in order to acquire Jaguar Land Rover is something which became much of a fable in the corporate space as well. It also earned them a lot of respect in the country's millennial eyes. People understood why it was important for an Indian brand to go ahead and acquire a foreign, much larger, very well respected brand the world over. So, that is why that also built a certain amount of respect internally for Tata as an automotive player. So, these are factors which came in the favor of Tatas. Now, there are certain tenets of caveats which we also need to understand here. Never get into over ambitious projects. The development of the Nano, it quite badly bled the Tatas to come up with a 1 lakh car, and to keep it there, it was again very difficult. So, they had to increase the price there. So, there was certain ambition, but that ambition was to answer the challenge thrown by the promise which Ratan Tata gave. Thereafter, they jacked the price up to a certain more manageable level, but it was still fairly competitively priced. And they never neglected market research. They knew that the market really wanted that kind of an entry level product in the form of a Nano. So, hence it was launched at that price point, aimed at that kind of an audience. And while you continuously do this, you do not allow your products to become outdated. If they do, then you very, very humbly phase them out of existence. So, today the need for that 1 lakh rupee entry level car no longer exists. The Tata Nano has been respectfully phased out. So, India has moved on. Now, you have a different set of offerings, and Tata's cars are now again very, very acceptable with the high end design. So, you can now make 15 lakh cars, 20 lakh rupee cars, 30 lakh rupee cars. So, depends on the visibility and the kind of goodwill that you have derived into the market, and also all the activities that you have been engaged with during the entire process, your entire corporate journey. So, that helps you become relevant and respected in the consumer's eyes today. So, coming to the end of this entire conversation, you will see that the product life cycle or PLC and new product development or NPD, these are critical frameworks for businesses, and these aim to thrive in competitive markets where you have to listen to market feedback. You have to understand stages of a product's life cycle, including the introduction, the growth, maturity and decline, and you need to respectfully pass through each of these stages without becoming emotionally entangled with it. You have to allow it to phase its growth to the next levels. This helps organization anticipate challenge and sustain growth as they move forward. offerings are made to have a finite shelf life. Once that finiteness of the shelf life is over, you may have to shelve that particular product because you bring in better, newer, more advanced options which will take its place. Tata Motors exemplifies this particular approach, and they have innovated to meet diverse customer needs, from affordable cars like the Tata Nano to luxury offerings which are from the JLR stables. They leverage customer insights, technological advancements and strategic planning to ensure they meet all these requirements. They have aligned their product mix to actually go ahead and marry into the market demands, and the emphasis on continuous innovation which they have done to ensure the product meets the consumer taste. They have utilized the resources efficiently and continued with the market research. This underscores the importance of how they adapt to certain situations on the ground level. And ultimately, any organization that anticipates customer preferences, they listen in for feedback, they develop diverse offerings and refine strategies, they can not only survive, but can also lead in dynamic industries like automotive for instance, and they fulfill their mission to create value for consumers and stakeholders, both external ones and internal ones, and that is how they thrive in the always shifting, always volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous world of business out there. So, with that we come to an end of today's conversation. I thank you for being a very, very patient and very, very lovely audience today. In the next segment, we will pick up a market response case study for your benefit and learning. Until that time, please allow me to depart. Thank you.
Hello, good morning everybody. I am Raghunandan Sengupta. So, I will just give you a very brief excitement area of finance, which is quantitative finance, and that has a huge market starting around about 10 years back, and it is exploding exponentially. So, what do we mean by quantitative finance? Quantitative finance is actually the application of different mathematical and statistical techniques in the area of financial markets, be it say for example derivative pricing, be it in the area of say for example portfolio management, be it in the area of asset liability management, be it in the area of portfolio management. We see that the application has exploded in such a way that there is a huge opportunity for people who have a quantitative background in mathematics and statistics. They can utilize those in the area of finance, but obviously with some prior knowledge of finance as a subject. Now, when we say about quantitative finance, as I said, it is an area of applied mathematics and statistics applied in financial markets. Use of different areas, if somebody is interested to know, we have stochastic calculus, we have derivative pricing, we have operation research, we have quantitative techniques like differential equations, stochastic calculus, time series, and they are heavily used in the area of quantitative finance as I mentioned. Now, we all know that in 1997 the Nobel Prize in Economics, so it is basically the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economics was given to the work of Merton and Scholz in the area of derivative pricing, and after that there has been exponential increase in the area of quantitative techniques in quantitative finance and in the area of different type of derivative pricing. With the advent, moreover with the advent of high-ended and sophisticated computing data, big data has come in a very big way, where application areas starting from computing, from different type of algorithm design have been taken up in such a big way that nowadays at least we are able to understand that how high frequency data algorithm trading can be utilized using the concept of quantitative finance in the area of finance as such. But there is a flip side also, obviously when there is a huge amount of development, So, obviously due to some regulation errors or something, there has been some pitfalls, which I think is should be a bullet point for people who are really interested to take up quantitative finance. They should be aware. So, consider the financial crisis in 2008 and later on, and we are seeing different banks are failing, different financial institutions are facing a problem, countries are facing a problem like in Europe, in USA. So, what should be done? So, the main thing is that even if you know the technique is best for people who are investors, who are private players, organizations like banks, governments should use these techniques in a very somber manner such that the application areas of quantitative finance using the techniques which we learned can be utilized in the best possible way to garner the overall the in depth knowledge a person has in trying to utilize these quantitative techniques in finance. And I am sure that people who have the background, who have the knowledge, who have the sophistication, who have the knowledge of the society can definitely use quantitative finance in a very big way in trying to make their mark in this exciting field, which you are going to see in years to come. And I am sure it will be a very exciting learning tool for all the participants who will take quantitative finance as a subject in years to come. Thank you, and I wish all the participants all the best and best of luck for the programs they will take. Thank you.